probably less than 40% of the people who register in person showing up.
Oh, really?
So yeah,
Okay.
but so sounds like you got Zoom going there. And so then I'll go ahead and log you into Zoom. Okay. And you can to start the headphone. Yeah, okay. All right, yeah. Okay. Hi. Hey David, there's oh thank you.
I brought you a sandwich and a cookie.
Nice.
Well, that's very thoughtful of you. What's the date like? That's oh,
You know what's better? First lunch?
second lunch. I call it dinner.
I was just talking to a friend
That was
in the
beautiful.
lunchroom, and she.
That was in the lunchroom?
Oh, there's 2 doors down.
Oh,
Dan brought lunch to the masses.
Yes, yes.
Very thoughtful.
There's probably an email that said such.
Well, technically it was for the people who attended the AI session.
Oh.
Out of the speaker who came in, he's an AI fellow from the state chancellor's office. And so we were trying to entice more faculty to come in. We had like 3, 4. Hi.
Just in there. All right. Ah,
I got it.
yeah. I brought this thing.
Mhm.
So I don't think I ever talked to you about this. This is my lucky clicker.
Is that right?
I've had it since college.
Oh, it's seen days. Oh.
Dave, is that
There
what
we
we're gonna say? Were you gonna judge?
Identify. Clicker. Which one's advance? What is this? This is Japanese.
It's Americanese. Oh, it is a Kingston. I normally just plug mine into my Mac and it.
Did
That's what that doesn't it? Yeah, start echoing.
okay.
Yeah, it's a word.
So. Wasted a lot of energy. The last 12 hours.
Which was fun. It was fun. We didn't waste it. Because having experienced it the way you did, next time it'll be different.
One would hope.
I mean, it's not gonna be noticeable. You're not gonna get through the next one and be like, oh yeah, this is what it is. It's in 10 years, you'll be like, oh my God, this used to drive me nuts.
Should be able to then, but now I'm going to see if you do here.
Hi, Kristen.
Hello, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Hi, Angelica and Valerie. And read.ai meeting notes. Welcome. We'll get started at 1:15.
Soon go. Well, better.
Some have people online.
It's very possible. I would say highly likely.
You might want to move this then. You have an HDMI extender by any chance? No.
So, start. Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, hello, this is Dan. Oh,
Welcome.
Good, how about yourself?
Got the sign-in sheet
Um,
here, and then there's 2 handouts. So there is a strong possibility that the majority of our attendees are digital. Virtual. That's what I was thinking. It's like, really?
That's what he said, he go get some more density.
No, well, a friend of mine said nobody showed theirs. Hers was only in person.
Well, I know at least one.
Ah,
So they too.
you in a crowd.
I won't stop homosexuality before we do it less. Right after the
That's fine.
pandemic, intense. I didn't stand, I just sat. We sat in circles. Oh no, there were 6.
Like a discussion.
Yeah, it was very Shadowlands.
So did you have a moment? 'Cause you were like,
Huh? Yeah, but I was more arrogant.
You didn't bring your,
Oh, you do recognize. Because I am being recognized. No, yeah, no, I don't have my dragon.
today.
I don't have her. I should have, I had her yesterday.
Oh, did you?
Mhm.
Aw.
like a real.
Bearded dragon.
Oh, yes, it's so cool.
Yeah, I have a sensory processing disorder. So certain textures, certain overwhelming stuff can trigger anxiety for me. So I carry her instead of 7 different medications that they have.
Oh, how fun is that? Because that would probably prevent anxiety in other people.
So it was a study done that bearded dragons are really good with autistic kids. They don't set off the sensory processing stuff.
Yeah.
They don't lick, they don't bark, they don't
Huh.
do any of that. They're like a sensory toy. All their spikes are different, they feel different,
Oh.
different heights.
Yeah. So it's really grounding.
I've placed 1, 2, 3, 4 dragons in 4 homes that have nonverbal autistic children,
Awesome.
and they all adore them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I normally carry her, but I don't have her.
See, at first it didn't make sense, but as soon as you explained. Yeah.
My husband carries one. He has severe PTSD from a bad childhood.
Mm,
So certain stuff, like even going into Costco would set him off. He carries one as easier than a dog. Less complications than a dog.
Yeah.
I'm a vet tech also,
Oh.
on top of that, so.
hello.
I figured, don't have the dog fight issue. Because everybody takes their dogs everywhere,
Right.
It's true.
so.
Hey, Happy New Year.
How's it going?
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, enjoying this warmer weather today.
Nice out there. Let's get out there. My brother in Minnesota, when we talked about having. Said it's 1 degree.
Just one.
It feels like 1. I think it was 8 degrees,
Oh.
but it feels like.
There's a whole thing with like the wind chill. Like down in Minnesota, will say that. It's like
We have that here.
20 below. 40, yeah. with the
Yeah.
wind chill. We have that here.
Yeah, we have wind chill. We also have heat.
Do we know?
Yeah.
Is it like-
No, I mean, they report.
Go through that heat.
Well, even though there's a heat thing, they'll tell you like, but it feels
Oh,
like
the
because
heat.
the humidity.
Yes,
Yeah.
but we really don't even have humidity.
No.
I mean, the few days that we do, it's noticeable.
Did I not put out markers?
I found one marker that you left, so I put that.
Oh, whiteboard mark? I see.
No.
Oh, pardon. Gotcha.
Here,
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah. All right, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Now you're a presenter.
How's your partner feeling?
My what?
Your partner, they were sick yesterday?
Getting in there, but,
Just a flu bug or?
no, I think that's just like a mental health day.
Oh,
As department assistant. I got some information from,
Hi. Hello.
when I applied for the nursing one for the department assistant.
I'm not the health center.
There was a thing, I don't know if it was.
I didn't know about that, but I have to come to that, so.
But my memo knows that anyone else.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh,
I think it would keep stress.
start.
All right.
Oh, 1 minute past.
I know there was like.
We're gonna need that on the other side.
No.
I don't know.
Good afternoon, how's everyone feeling today? I almost said this morning, you know, I took. Well, Professor Reiss and I are very excited. We had our first go yesterday, so this is round 2, and I think you guys are gonna get the polished version. It's gonna be awesome.
Yeah.
I think you had a really great amended title you shared. I don't know if you wanted to share it today. And then just right-
Well, it was just after we came up with this relational intelligence, I thought maybe instead we could have called it, get your shit together.
Oh. Do it.
Subtitle, don't be a shit.
Which is helpful for everyone.
Yeah. From the people who need to be here.
That's just good. That's true, yeah. We workshopped it and we stuck with this one. It was already on all the marketing material, so.
Yeah.
So my name is Diana Wolf. I teach in the Behavioral Sciences Department. Prior to coming to BC, I worked for about 12 years in the industrial organizational psychology space. I also have a background as a therapist.
I'm David Reiss. I teach in the behavioral science department here as well. And I've been here for 21 years, 10 years full time. I was also a therapist in the community for about 19 years, but haven't practiced since 2019. I like this a lot better.
All right, so relational intelligence.
Not gonna work?
I'm in.
Okay. All right, so let's talk about this. Relational intelligence. Why relational intelligence? So, in my background, I worked on hiring, training, developing, recognizing, rewarding, and creating high performance teams. I can tell you the highest performing teams, I found 2 common themes. 1, they tended to be the most diverse, and 2, they were really high in relational intelligence. That means they were able to understand what they brought to the team. They were able to understand what others were bringing. They were able to effectively engage in conflict. They actually embraced it and they were able to work through it successfully, which ultimately led to more meaningful relationships. And so I found that this not only works in the business world, but absolutely is transferable to our lives here at BC. And there are 4 different things that we'll go through today. One of the things that I loved about this presentation, totally biased that we created it, is that it's not just about the rationale and the theory, but it's how. So how can I make this applicable? It's not just knowledge that's power, but it's applied knowledge. And so first, what we see with relational intelligence, increased student engagement. So engagement is more than just a cognitive process. I'm paying attention to you. It's actually much deeper than that. It's emotional and it's relational. If I know that you care about me, if I know that you've taken the time to connect, to understand where I'm coming from, I'm more likely to show up to your class. I'm more likely to turn in an assignment. I'm more likely to raise my hand and be vulnerable. Second, improve boundaries. And boundaries are one of those things that, unfortunately, there's a lot of things like this in life where we recognize it when it's not going well. It's very obvious. And so we can hear boundaries being talked about in terms of the negative. I need better boundaries. They are not respecting my boundaries. And so it can feel like a wall when really, when boundaries are functioning well and in a healthy fashion, they actually create deeper connection, more lasting connection. So we'll go through that. Improve communication. If I understand again where you're coming from and what I'm bringing to the table, I can meet you more effectively. And again, it kind of underlines it, this idea of the relationship. Which is key, especially when you think back to your educational journey and the relationships that brought you to where you are today. So how do we continue to cultivate that?
I think now wants to go with your clicker.
Oh, yeah. I'm up. You know what? We're gonna go manual.
It's caught in between clicks.
Who is it?
I think he's getting too much.
Clickers don't have a relationship.
They don't.
Quicker intelligent. All right, so let's go. There is this quote, if I have, so relational intelligence, it's the capacity to absorb, follow, and react to the dynamics of interpersonal relationships. This is a direct quote from Esther Perel. She is an amazing author, therapist. Yes, I got a little heart. Guess that would be like an analog emoji about Esther Perel. And so we took her quote and we actually leveled it up. So it's not just about reacting, it's about responding. It's about being aware. And so you can consciously choose that response. It's done in a way that, again, gets you where you want to go. So it's recognizing that everyone's behavior really makes sense to them. And so when I put on that lens, I can get more curious, and that leads to deeper connection and a greater sense of this relational intelligence.
That's more like responding as opposed to reacting, because when somebody does something that sets you off and you just react to it, you have no curiosity to yourself. They're wrong. I gotta fix that. But instead, if you just tell yourself they have the reasons or it makes sense to them, then that gives you at least a beat or a pause. Go ahead.
Yeah. So relational intelligence is the recognition that we exist in a constellation of relationships. I'm not just here in a vacuum, but I'm here next to someone who has a life that's just as rich and vivid as mine. And again, when I engage that curiosity, when I have the awareness of everything that I'm bringing to the table, it leads to more effective life experiences. So embedded in these relationships are systems of power, trust, and meaning, and we'll continue to get deeper into these. So what do those relationships look like? How do those set up? And where do I exist? Really, the foundation of relational intelligence is this idea of self-awareness. Do I know myself? And do I understand what those hot buttons are that cause me to feel like I want to react? Do I have the awareness that I don't have to react, that I can take that step back and respond? And with self-awareness, there's really two pieces. There's this internal. So I'm aware of what my values are. I'm aware of what my beliefs are. And I'm aware of values, beliefs, and emotions. So both of those, that our beliefs and values kind of bring up an emotion in us, whether we're aware of it or not. And that can cause us to lean towards or lean away. The second piece of the self-awareness is really external. So I'm aware of how others experience me. And it's in the kind of magic of those two that I can then set myself up to increase my emotional intelligence,
And relational intelligence. So the relational intelligence is just recognizing where am I in all of this. The emotional intelligence is really a lot of self-work. So they're not the same. But having emotional intelligence is key to cultivating or generating some relational intelligence. If you don't know yourself first, then the relational stuff wouldn't matter as much. So this is just some really basic brain science. There's just two parts of the brain that I want to draw attention to. Starting with this is the amygdala, and the amygdala is pretty popular in the last 25 years. So more people are aware of it. But if you go in here, about here, and then right in the middle, It's right in the center of the base of the brain above the, or part of the limbic system. But the amygdala, that's something you're born with. It's there right from the very start. That's how babies can express emotion, and moms can interpret, and dads can interpret the cry that baby's tired, baby's hungry. Babies are dumb. They don't know that they're tired or hungry. That's why we have to say to them things like, you're a happy little baby, just so they can start to associate what they're feeling with an actual word that identifies what they're experiencing. So here's an example of somebody who only really has an amygdala and not much of it.
Baby. Silly baby. Mummy's nose scare you when I blow it? Does that scare you when mommy blows her nose? Yeah.
There's one baby, you know what I'm saying? He's like one of the first things that go on right away. Something like that. These things are 15, 20 years. So he's like probably an adult. So when you think about it. And he now has, or he's close to having one of these that I'll talk about in just a moment. But he's so dumb, he can't figure out that when mom covers her face with a tissue and makes this really loud sound, that's still mom. And as soon as he takes it away, he then recognizes her, and he knows that that's the lady who feeds me and cares for me, cuddles me. I like the way she smells, like just basic like impulse stuff. And then this other part of the brain is called the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex takes until your mid-20s to develop, 25 to 28. And for a lot of folks, neuroscientists just started figuring this out in the last 25 years. The car insurance companies have known this for a really long time. For a long time, car insurance companies would not rent you a car if you're under the age of 25. Were they doing neuroscience to figure that out? No, they were just looking at their data and who gets in wrecks to a statistically significant higher level, people under the age of 25. And if you think about your own journey, wherever you are on it, and think back to when you were pre-25, you think, what an idiot that person was. I mean, they're doing the best they could with what they had at the time, but they were clueless compared to, and I do this with the students too, we talk about it in there, and 18-year-olds look at their 16-year-old self and say like, what an idiot. That's because you're on this like trajectory that sort of plateaus 26, 28, and you ride that wave for the rest of your life. So here's how these two work together. It actually comes through the prefrontal cortex first, but immediately you're going to have like an emotional gut, visceral response to it. And then that communicates back up to here. And you have to interpret that, what that means. So there's like this constant communication, both positive and negative things. Right. And so if you're not aware of this emotional response thing that is, we'll talk in a minute about it being intrusive and involuntary, and that your response to it is something that you do have, you don't have control over the emotion itself, but you have control over your response to the emotion. I'm feeling this way. I don't necessarily have to address it or be paralyzed by it, or maybe I do need to tend to it. For example, if I've had a long day at work and I come home and my partner's like, hey, could you take out the trash? I'm gonna have a visceral gut emotional response to that probably. Like, seriously? I just barely walked in the door. How about like, hello? Like, you see how I can have like all sorts of immediate emotional responses. But that doesn't mean that I can't just be like, maybe she's had a bad day too. Like, give myself a beat. Take out the trash, it's not that big of a deal. You see, take out the trash, it's not that big of a deal. Maybe she's had a day. That's all prefrontal cortex stuff. Okay, so that's part of emotional intelligence. Here's some definitions of what emotional intelligence is. I know I went by kind of fast, but it's written on your page too. So it's acknowledging your own emotional responses. It's recognizing and identifying, this is down at the bottom of the first page, your own emotional responses, intending to. Also, it's not making others responsible for yours and their emotional responses. These are yours. Not making other people pay for. You made me feel this way. Well, I'm going to double down and make you feel worse. That's not emotional intelligence. It's also curiosity about yours. Like, why am I feeling this way? And theirs, emotional responses. And then giving yourself first, but then others, empathy and grace for their emotional response. So I mentioned just a moment ago. These emotional responses are both, you have some blanks there. Just to give you something to do, keep you engaged. That's what I do to the students. Top of page 2. So if they're involuntary and intrusive. You can't control, as I mentioned before, too, your emotional response. It just happens. But you can become acquainted with your emotions. You can learn from your emotional responses. And you can tend to your emotional responses. You also can act in spite of your emotional responses. Those things are key features of emotional intelligence. Remember little baby Emerson just a few minutes ago? All amygdala? The prefrontal cortex, 25 to 28, somewhere in there. The amygdala has been there since birth. What that means is you have emotional memories that predate your brain's ability to sort them out. Which is why if ever you're in a situation, you're like, I just don't like it, and you can't figure out why. Or sometimes smell, the olfactory has been that for a while. Sometimes smells will set people off and they don't remember the details associated with the smell, or a vibe. Somebody's vibe is just something that's either you're drawn to and you don't know why, or you're like repulsed by and you don't know why. So the emotions have been there from the beginning in the brain. So all of that to say, with emotional intelligence, we add that with practicing emotional intelligence thoughtfully and empathetically in the world around you, and that's where you get relational intelligence. I couldn't decide if it was like a multiplication thing or an addition thing. I think it's an addition thing, but I think it grows exponentially. Doesn't really matter. Here you are. Yeah, I'll keep working on the calculus of it. So just real quick, there's 2 points to this. First is recognizing the nature of these different relationships and where they fit in. And then also there's an element to that, like where's your emotional energy belong or reside. So you can start with the easiest one to see is the self. It's a little bit bigger and it's touching up against the self here in the middle. So just go ahead and write self there in the middle of that bubble. And then just above that, if you have kids, that's pretty close to who you are. I mean, biologically, they're part of the universe, but then also just your connection to them and the level of intimacy. And then on this side, you have like your partner. That's very close. It's very similar in proximity to the kids. And then you see on the friendship, it's right here, but you can also see that friendship sort of leaks in over that intimacy part. So you have some friends that you feel really close to. Some friends who know you better than just about anybody on the planet, except maybe your partner, or maybe even know you better than your partner. And then you have some friends that are more out here, necessarily acquaintance type. Yeah, you get how this is all working. You know, figuring out where to drop them in the circles. Colleagues, you can be friends with colleagues. You don't have to be. Sometimes you're forced to share an office with somebody, so you have to act like your friends. He's right over here.
Present company.
He was my friend. He was my friend first. He's been friends with my partner since they were like little kids. And I didn't tell him. I knew they knew each other, but I didn't tell him that we were dating. He saw us walking together and then we were holding hands 10 years ago, and he's very excited even. That's how long we've been. And then this one, I'll just be honest, this one for me is a little bit tough today. My brother lives in St. Paul, Minnesota, and he and his son are marching on the Capitol. And so I have some issues with this group, but really my emotional energy isn't about them. There's nothing I can do about this today. My emotional energy is about my brother, my family, and nephew. Do you see how that is? So just keeping the emotional energy intact, because I know I can sometimes expend a lot of emotional energy on this that's very far away from where I need to be. Okay, and then the students, which is we're going to be talking about a lot here, and the students, that's an acquaintance, and for a semester it feels like a friend. Like it's with relational intelligence, you do get close, and at the end of the semester, some students, I'm not for everybody, but some students will be like, Professor Reiss, I really enjoyed your class. I'm going to miss you and stuff like that. And you're going to move on. You're like, I'll get a new batch. You'll get a new professor. But this has been nice. Like we're not gonna hang out. We're friends. It's never really been an issue. because I have boundaries.
Yeah, so we saw from those concentric circles, just as we live in a world really lives within us. And our ability to kind of negotiate where we put our energy, where we focus that emotional connection, that dynamic would be a boundary. And so a boundary, again, it doesn't reduce connection. It actually creates clarity and allows us to care about the things that are really important to us. And so when we think about boundaries, it really exists along a continuum. So we can have very, very rigid boundaries or very, very permeable boundaries. I know exactly where I stand. I have no clue. I'm looking for the outside world to tell me where I belong and who I am. So boundaries, when it comes to ourself, if you're very rigid and on one end of that spectrum, you're really keeping people at a distance. You've got a staunch sense of self-reliance. I've got to do it, otherwise it won't get done my way. I can't depend on anyone else. You really push against others. You don't want anyone else's input, and you're reluctant to ask for help. So an analogy we like to use here is this idea of the lone oak. Very sturdy, very strong, very self-reliant. On the other end, when we swing that pendulum down to permeable, what we see is that, again, really not quite sure where I am. I'm kind of everywhere, nowhere, all at once. So we're highly affected by external circumstances. We tend to overshare, or we have that fear of rejection. It depends on inclusion. Am I a part of the group or am I not part of the group? That's where I put my self-worth, and it can get really scary. So where we want to be, like most things in life, is kind of more in that middle, that happy space, that sweet spot. And when we're flexible as individuals, it allows us to make choices regarding what we share or what we let in. Again, there's a really huge piece of critical thinking that comes in here, right? It's about being aware of the decision I made. And if there's brand new information, I'm going to incorporate that. I'm going to be flexible. I still have my sense of self, my values, my beliefs, but I'm able to respond effectively to the outside world as opposed to that strong, absolutely not. I've already made up my mind. So that's what it looks like within ourselves. In relationship with others, again, boundaries can be energy giving because I understand where I am, what works for me. I hear what works for you, and I can either give on that or I'm going to stand strong, and that's completely okay. So in relationships, when we're really rigid, it does create that space. It can build that wall because you're going to do it my way, and it's really authoritarian. It's because I said so. So do it or don't do it. The wall is up. Permeable. I think an analogy that comes to mind for me is just wanting to get and be friends with all of the students, get that 5 out of 5 on Rate My Professor. I get, yeah, sure, whatever you want to do, come, don't come, turn in assignments, don't turn assignments. People might really like you, but in terms of effectiveness, in terms of learning the content, gaining a greater sense of self-efficacy, the students are really going to miss out on that. And again, the ideal would be being able to flex and be somewhere in the middle. So when you're flexible with your boundaries, you're able to balance that independence and collaboration. I recognize that if I know colleagues in the nursing department, sometimes everyone has a test scheduled on the same week. Maybe I'm going to make mine a week earlier or a week later because I can adapt. I've got that flexibility. You're still going to have to do it. I still have that expectation, but I can be a little bit flexible. And therefore it encourages growth because I can, again, respond and I get that you see me.
So what we're gonna do is just a really quick thought exercise. And if you just take your pen
or just think about the first letter of each one of these, like G, A, and so on. And then the self, you could write the whole thing. The self, are you more rigid with yourself? Like you hold yourself to high expectations, and if you don't meet those high expectations, you failed. Or on this end, you're just like, whatever happens, happens. I don't give a shit. So where would you put yourself on this? And after you've plotted yourself on this continuum somewhere, right? Then plot the rest, but don't write them out because we don't have that kind of time. Just use the letters. The letters will work. Not where you'd like to be, but where you think, if you just need to be honest with yourself, nobody has to share it.
We'll just post them up on the board afterwards.
I'll have you all come up. And then we actually have a scoring system. And we'll tell you who has the best boundaries in class.
I find exercises like this are good to do kind of spaced apart. So I know when I look at my boundaries, when I first started teaching versus where I am now, there has been shifts.
Oh, yeah.
Because there's new information.
Oh, man, when you first start teaching and every test comes back in F or every test comes back in A, it totally changes everything that you're going to do. You can continue to think about those things. I want to talk to you about some of the pros and cons, which is written down on your paper too, if you're still in contemplation about where those relationships land. The upside to rigidity is you have certainty, consistency, predictability. You have total control over what's going on. And then in terms of permeability, it can go with the flow. Now we had the imagery up there of the oak tree and the water. The thing about an oak tree is it can't bend, it can only break. So if you're going to be firm, and I do think there are some values that we all have in our lives where we want to be oak trees on that. I can't bend on this thing. And there may be some times that just going with the flow, like going to family dinners or something like that, even though that uncle or those relatives bother you, really, it's whatever, it doesn't matter. And so you like water there. And then flexibility is that you're adaptable and you're open and you're looking for connection, but not going to compromise yourself in order to accomplish it. And that's the grass, it blows in the wind, right? It's flexible. So those are the pros to all of those things. Here are the cons. This limits your perspective to your own for the most part. And that's going to limit your solutions. You don't know what to do with unpredictability. Everything works great, like for engineers or something where everything's just A plus B equals C. You can be a little bit more rigid. For human relationships, it doesn't work. It's exhausting and it can lead to power struggles because you got to stay firm like an oak tree. You can't bend on anything. You can only break, so your relationships don't have the flexibility of grass. And then the cons to permeability is you can't set boundaries when you need to. It's emotionally exhausting. When I was a therapist, I dealt a lot with relationships and couples. And this is what I use to indicate to them, like, this is enmeshed. This is an enmeshed relationship. You don't know where you end and the other person begins because it's permeable, right? And so what ends up happening is you drag each other around all the time. I don't like the way she's responding to me, so I change my behavior in an effort to get her to respond the way I'd like her to. And she's doing the same thing. So we become versions of ourselves in order to please and appease. And that is exhausting. It'll take you about 20 years and then you'll decide this marriage isn't for me. Or just random. I'm not talking about any situation in particular.
We're not oversharing.
I feel like we have a relationship already. I mean, it starts out with this one, but the downside to flexibility is really it requires a lot of work. It requires a lot of work. It's very easy to just move toward either of these because they're control based. Like, I don't want to upset anybody, so I'm just gonna like not say anything, or I'm not gonna let anybody get close to me, and so I'm gonna stay firm in where I am. And this means that sometimes I need to be firm, and sometimes I need to be not firm.
Yeah, and that would require us to do that self-reflection and that self-work. And so again, I shared, I've noticed that for me, it can change depending on how I've grown, how circumstances have changed. And so one thing that we wanted to say about that is that it is natural for boundaries to change. That is okay. And know that when that does happen, whether we're becoming more rigid or we're becoming more permeable, even if it's just a little step, it's not a giant leap, you can start to feel like you're going all the way to the other side. So that's where, again, that self-awareness is huge. Like, okay, where am I in this? And what is my goal? Where do I want to be? Am I moving towards that or am I moving away from that? And that will allow me to then respond so I can self-correct. All right. So when it comes to,
See if they have any.
okay, do you have any examples of where?
Whatever your interaction is with whoever you serve, whether it's students or faculty or whatever it is. Where you operate from, or well, we're thinking from student perspective. That's our life.
Very flexible,
Yeah,
but I do notice that it requires more like emotional, what was it, like work?
yeah, work.
Because sometimes I can be rigid, but it depends on the situation, so now I have to think about it and then. Yeah.
Very good.
I have everything inflexible, like I'm not too rigid, but not too like.
And you can move if you need to a little bit. Right on. Any other?
I think David online.
Yes.
I think for me, what I had to learn from my first year to now is that I can never allow myself to get too comfortable in rigidity or flexibility. Like I have to be able to say, okay, I'll be flexible about these things, but these things absolutely cannot, exams, unless there's a crisis. But other things might be more flexible.
But see, even when you were just trying to be rigid just then.
Right. Right.
So yeah, I mean,
Right.
they have to take exams at a certain time. And you
Yes.
can have that as your policy on your syllabus, and you can have that as your practice overall. But if you're practicing relational intelligence and somebody comes to you and says, I was in a car accident or my grandfather just died, then of course you're a reasonable human being. You'll be flexible and work with them. Nice. So that was Dr. Maitsabi in psychology, and she was operating like in this space.
So
here's some
from,
examples. Oh, yes, go ahead.
I teach in the nursing department, and it's kind of difficult because we're a pre-licensure program, and so there's certain things that they have to meet that we don't always have the choice in rigidity. And so that has been sort of an interesting thing because my very first semester, my attitude was sort of like, you're all adults, you signed up for this, whatever. So it was much more probably permeable and flexible. And I've learned that with certain things, we have to be somewhat rigid because we're held to a state mandate.
Absolutely.
And that was really difficult. And so it's sort of hard to find a happy medium. And I've had the benefit to get to talk to Diana about some of it. And she's helped me through some of those things because I don't come from a background of leadership. I was the highest I went in the hospital was charge nurse. And if somebody had a major issue, I got to send them to the manager. So I didn't have to deal with that, right? It was great. It was above my pay grade. I was like, well, go talk to the manager. Bye, goodbye. So something that I have learned is that very clearly, and also other thing with the nursing students, I don't know if there's any other nursing instructors in the program or in the class right now. Our students are in a cohort. So they are all in school together from the time of their first semester through their final semester, and they talk to each other. So if one gets one thing one way, they all want it that way. And so it's a whole thing about, well, you did this for this student. They all know. So I try to make it very clear to them that this is the expectation. However, we all have lives, right? So if you are clear in your communication, so for example, I think Dr. Maytavi was just saying, if there is an emergency and you need to communicate to me ahead of time, or you need to be very clear with your communication, because then we can have that discussion. And I make sure that that's very clear in my syllabus, because I do have to come out with like, hey, you don't just get to not turn things in and then get credit for it later. That kind of a thing, because we're trying to also teach them some professionalism, because they're going to go out and get jobs where they're responsible for human life. And we do try to really instill that level of responsibility in them. And I've actually had really good luck with that from their very first semester of nursing school, where they then start to understand, oh, if I reach out before this assignment is due and let my instructor know, I had this major emergency happen. One of my students just last semester, her father had a catastrophic event that he ended up dying from, and she had an exam the next day, and she called me over the weekend and let me know. And I said, absolutely, let's move your exam. Let's give you an extra, like, how much time do you need to take the exam? And we were able to be flexible with it. And that's all written into the syllabus so that they can do that. And it worked out really, really well so that we could make that happen without it being overly rigid and without it being unfair and looking like she was getting preferential treatment to the other students. Because again, within these small cohorts, they all talk to each other, but
Right.
it's kind of like walking a tight wire, especially because I've been here now for just, I think, under 4 years. So I still feel relatively new.
Well, this is something I say. I just had a birthday, and my son said, "Happy birthday, old man." And I said, given the span of the universe, we all just got here. We're practically the same age. So you can say
I like that. I like that.
4 years, but we all just got here. And you gave us a lot to think about in terms of like, my past was in the hospital. I worked with a lot of nurses. In so much so that when I finally got away from working with nurses and was just teaching full time, I thought, so great, because being around so many nurses, especially the ratio in the hospital is like 20-1 female to male ratio. And so I tell the nurses all the time, I'm not him. Your husband, your son, your father, whoever you're upset with. But then I realized most of my students were nurses getting their behavioral science part. And then now that I'm a little bit older, I'm thinking I'm going to need these nurses in a few years. So I should be nicer to them. So there are parts, then I appreciate this about the nursing program, because when I need a nurse, I want them to be qualified about rigidity. I teach in the behavioral sciences. That's a little bit less rigidity. Especially, I'm introducing them to sociology. I'm not getting them to their research project for their thesis down the road. I'm not working, I have taught in a social work program before too. So I'm not launching therapists out of my classroom. I'm seeing a lot of first-time college students. And so I can offer more flexibility. They have to get their stuff done, right? So
yeah, and they have to get it done a certain way. But I have, like I said, I've had the wonderful benefit of getting to talk to Diana about how can I do this in such a way that it is equitable and fair. It meets these standards. However, I'm not necessarily typically a super rigid person generally, but I also don't want to be to the point where they're not meeting their state requirements or I'm getting a grievance filed against me because I'm not holding everybody to the same standard.
That's where boundaries really creates that connection, that meaningful connection, because you can say, these are the expectations. It's very clearly written out and you can reinforce them with care. It's not punitive. It's not that I don't like you as a person. It's that I have these state requirements. Then when you know your craft so well, you've got that freedom within the framework. And so I went through
my favorite line I learned from Diana and that I've told my students and they actually really liked it is I said, hey, these are the expectations and I have every belief that everyone here can meet them. And that really, I got a big smile out of my first semester students because they really liked that I believe that they could meet these high expectations. And it really gave them all a confidence boost. So it was really, really good. And it really made them all feel really confident. And they all really did exceed expectations. It was great. So it's been a really good journey. So I was excited to take this class, but it is really hard, especially because I'm not typically a rigid person. And so sometimes I think I go over rigid because I don't want to be overly permeable. So it's a swinging pendulum for me.
It's a journey and nobody's arrived yet. We get to do this. I had, when I was a therapist, I had patients sit across from me and they're like, must be nice having this all figured out. And I was like, I have nothing figured out. And my goal is to maybe get it figured out somewhere between 85 and dead. Because what else are you going to do with the rest of your life? Like get it figured out at 28 and then just like sit around for till death. But, so we're going to switch it up just a little bit, right where you are. I know this is a big ask that you're sitting comfortably. You can just push out from your desk. This is to get us in touch with our brain. Push out from your desk and just stand up next to your desk. Everybody, it doesn't have to, but I appreciate it. All right, and those of you at home too, you should be standing up next to your desks. There's no way for me to know if you are or not. So do you see what I have? I have power. Do you see how I was able to get you to do something? You go ahead and sit down. I just want to show you how much power I have.
So if we were rigid and said, no, we're gonna stay with it.
You know what, I have, because I do this with students in my class too. I have some students that are like, I'm playing your games, man. But the pressure of everybody's like, just stand up. Like eventually even the most rigid, like stubborn people will break. And then I relish in my power. And so power is the ability to have choices or having choices over your life. But it's also control over the lives of other people. So thinking about self-power, do I have the power to go to the grocery store without checking my bank account first? Or do I have to look in there and say, I got 12 days left in the month. I have this much money. I can spend $40 a day, $20 a day, $5, $2 a day, whatever it is. Those numbers have all been real to me at different times in my life. At this point, if my friends say like, do you want to go out and get something to eat? I can say, yes, I have that kind of power. If they say, do you want to go to a baseball game? I'm gonna get back to you. Just, yeah. I hope to someday get to a point where they're like, you want to go to the Dodger game? I'm like, yes. That's just, I have that kind of power. And then control over other people's lives, as faculty and as administration and support services at Bakersfield College, we have a lot of power over our students' lives. And it's not power that, like, I can get my students to stand up. I can compel them to read something they might not otherwise read and get them to do assignments that they wouldn't do voluntarily, right? I can't get them to wash my car. I imagine if I offered extra credit, some of them would. But you see how there's a limit to my legitimate power in that regard, and it's still power. And then we have to also keep in mind the power they have over their own lives. Power is relative to the circumstance where we find ourselves. I don't have my notes. It's contextual or situational. And it's dynamic. The other thing about power is that one person can say, I'm powerful. But if they don't have somebody to be powerful over, it doesn't mean anything. Right? So somebody is out on the street and saying, like, give me your money. You're like, why? Like, just, but if they have a gun, that's more compelling. Do you see how that is? That for the dynamic part is the give and take of power and the recognition of legitimate power. Can you think of any statuses or roles in society that have either legitimate or illegitimate power over us? Can you say them out loud? It's yeah, you're safe.
Yeah.
The government.
The government, that's pretty big and ambiguous, but ultimately they have laws and then they have law enforcement. So you're not likely to interact like directly with the government, but
Denise, it looked like you were gonna say something.
Oh, I was gonna mention like the vaccine, you know, there was a time where I wanted to travel with somebody somewhere and they said, well, you can't travel there.
oh, right. So the government had that power over us at that time.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a good example.
My
Other-
boss.
Yes, your boss for sure
Boss.
has power over your life. Our parents, maybe religious leaders, and then also criminals who have, you know, malignant intent or malicious intent. You know, they have power over it. Now we don't recognize that power, but we have to recognize it if it threatens us in some way. So it comes in all different forms. And then also something else to think about with power, it can be power over, which is controlling and punitive and more toward the rigid side. Or it can be power to, and that's more collaborative. And this obviously, I hope this is evident at this point that this is the goal. Like I'm not an instructor because I want to convince students of anything. I want to help them become, I want to collaborate with them on becoming critical thinkers who see the world in a way maybe they haven't seen it before. Not my way, just 45 degrees to the side, just like a little bit like like that kind of curiosity and skepticism about the world. That's the goal. So this is power over. I mean, the police need to have power over to some extent, and like armed criminals, and then the power to, hopefully that's like your parents and your teachers and religious leaders.
I think the thing I like about talking about power as it pertains to relational intelligence is that whether we're aware of it or not, every single relationship we have has a power dynamic in it. And again, it's one of those things where we typically don't recognize it unless it's not going well, because my boss is a micromanager, or there's these crazy laws that are coming that spike my emotions. And so being mindful of that, and again, in any relationship, there is a power dynamic, and then knowing where it is. Are you the one with more power, or are you the one, is it equal? How does it change? So that leads us into this exercise for self-reflection.
You can contemplate it, because I don't think we can spend as much time on it as we wanted. But one of the things I was thinking about situational power in marriages, that a lot of times husbands maybe want their wives to come sit on the couch and hang out and stuff, but she feels this sort of pressure to clean up the kitchen. And he can even say something like, just leave it, we do it later. You see, that situational power. His identity isn't tied to what condition the kitchen is in, or the sense that if I don't do this, it's not going to be done. Like there's all these like power things that as a husband, I thought I was being nice by like You don't need to do that. Just come spend time with me and then I'll take care of itself later. There's like this genie who shows up and it's now, it gets done. Just leave it, just watch. Real quick, anybody, how do you experience power in your roles or your life?
I work in the financial aid office, so we deal with money, so there's a sense of power, for students, like, you know, it depends if they're gonna eat or they're gonna be able to live in their house that they're at, so.
And
Actually, I don't have the power, but I.
you represent a lot of power, for sure. What about the power students have? Can you think of any examples of student power?
For counseling, maybe the power of, because when I meet with the students, they ask how many classes or how long it will take to be in school. It all depends on how many classes you take per semester. You can go full time, you have the power to finish quick. But also think about other things, like if you're gonna pass some classes and everything, or if you take 1, 2 classes, it might take longer, but also, yes, they have the power to choose over what classes. We have a lot of options, how many classes, and all of that.
Yeah,
A great example.
very good. They also have the power of things like day-to-day things like showing up or not showing up. Do you have one?
You know, in student services, one thing that we do talk about is students have the power to advocate for one another, for themselves, and their voice, when they actually vocalize, matters more than any of us. I mean, honestly.
There's just this little trick in there though that you mentioned, that when they realize it.
Right.
Because there's so many powerful people around them, like people who just stand in front of the room.
Right, and, you know, we do hear from students that, you know, they're afraid to speak up or to say something, they're afraid of the consequences,
Yes.
you know, of punishment. And sometimes we tell them, you actually have the power. You know, I can advocate for you, I can do everything that's within my power to make, you know, a better outcome or have a result much sooner. But you really do, and they tend not to believe that.
It makes
They
no,
should.
it makes no sense to me. Every semester, the students will stand outside my door. They want to come talk to me, but they're afraid to walk in the door. And I live inside my own head all the time. I'm just a goofy guy who would like to take himself more seriously, but can't. And like, I'm just David. Like, I don't think of myself, but I'm an instructor. Right? And I stand up in the front and I talk about things that I talk about all the time. So it comes out smoothly most of the time or whatever you see. And so that's intimidating to the student who's just like new on the scene, and the power is built in. And so the recognizing part, that's a big part of what we do. This institution.
Absolutely, and I feel like this leads in really well to this slide. And so when we're aware of those power dynamics, how, to David's point, I think I'm pretty approachable. I feel like you're pretty approachable, but I could see how if I was fresh out of high school, if I am first generation, I don't really have context for the university setting, it's intimidating. And there's a true power differential. So then how do I shape the environment to help realize that power? And so this nice little pyramid that's kind of like a iceberg. So when we're looking at conflict in the kind of frame of relational intelligence, oftentimes the most salient part is that the tip of the iceberg, which is the fight, the situation. There's something that I'm not getting something, and I would like you to help me advocate for it because I'm afraid of that conflict. And again, that's what's spoken. That's what we see. It's really overt. They want this. They can't have this, or there's this barrier that's taking place. Underneath it, these are all the relationship dynamics that come in. And again, our previous conversation about power and priorities. Where do I stand in relation to this? Do I have that power over? Does the person feel like they have the power too? And this is just kind of built in. These other two, this is where the power of relational intelligence comes in, because those are cultivated. If I've set those boundaries, this is what we need to be successful. What is it that you're needing? How can we engage in that? If we've got that closeness and connection, then you feel comfortable walking into the office, or I feel comfortable kind of fumbling through my asking for support, which can be really hard. This next is that respect and recognition. Again, I see that this is really hard, but I know that you can do this. And so to Claire's point, that phrase, and I love using it. Yes, I have high expectations in my class, but I know that you can meet them. And I promise you that every time when you get ready to walk on that 4-year campus, there is nothing that a professor there is going to put you through that you can't handle because you successfully passed this class and all the other classes. So you've got this. And then the last piece, and this one again is really an understanding who you're working with, that we all come to the table with a relational history. And that's just fundamental. We're all looking for that connection. And it can be really scary to have that fear of rejection. Now, a lot of us have a little more time on this planet and a little more experience, so we know that rejection is not going to be that bad. But if you're just starting out, again, having that awareness so you can take it into account can be really helpful. The next thing we want to look at, and we'll do this really quickly, are just the conflict styles. Sorry.
Let's just talk.
kidding.
Let's just talk about the last part that
Yeah.
you have fight or flight, fawn, freeze, all these, you've heard these things before. We just wanted to go over that to make the point that fleeing is the most common response for our students. When they come up against conflict or stress, they just disappear. Maybe they disappear for a minute and then come back and then they disappear for a minute. All right, in terms of communication, just want to talk about this real quick. On this end of the continuum is fear-based communication, and over here is acceptance and relational-based, everything that this was building up to communication. So you can think of both of those, rigid or permeable, as being manipulative forms of communication. You're trying to control the other person's response to you, either by being aggressive, so like bullying them to go along with the way you see things, or by just going with the flow so they'll like you, or so you won't rock the boat, you won't poke the bear kind of thing. And then on the other end of the continuum is flexible. And I use the words making and letting. And I hear this a lot when I was a therapist. I heard this a lot in relationships or in my office. I saw it a lot in my own life, still do. But sometimes couples want to make the other person love them, make the other person respect them, make the other person understand them, as opposed to letting them. And when I showed you earlier about enmeshment, this is the making stuff. And then our relationship with the students, sometimes we're trying to make them understand, sometimes we're trying to make them responsible, sometimes we're trying to make them scholars, as opposed to letting them become scholars. This is just the beginning for them. Let them see themselves as capable, as opposed to trying to. You can't make them capable. And so on this side, if you wanted to think of like passive and aggressive and even passive aggressive, all manipulative forms of communication, that's over there. And this side would be assertive. You're direct, you're open, you're honest, you're realistic. You are flexible when you need to be.
We're kind of extending that invitation.
Right. And so, I wanted to go back to that. Let's talk about the let just for a second. This is what I want. You need to let them find their way. Let them see themselves as scholars. And then something, this is gonna be one time I cuss in the beginning. You're getting a lot of support. This feels really good. All right. This is a mantra in my class. We gotta let them fuck up and figure it out. I'm constantly encouraging them to fuck up and figure it out. Like I teach stats, that's one of them. And the other in sociology, there's a little bit, I'm more internal, so I'm talking about the stats structure. And so do you, we're all stats instructors. They won't even start because they're afraid they're going to make a mistake or they don't know what they're doing. And all I need to encourage them, just start. It's okay, you're gonna be fine. You're not expected to know this. If you all could do this the first time I show it to you, I wouldn't have a job. There'd be no point to any of this. But if you don't fuck up first, then we can't figure it out. We can't, because we'll just probably have to go in and say like, just that needs to be there, and then you're fine.
Yeah.
You see how it is? But we have to let them do that. Is this you or is me or is me still? It's me still. So we want to listen and reflect and validate. I'm guilty of wanting to solve I used to say this sort of thing in therapy to patients all the time, especially to men, because we're problem solvers. And then I'd go home and I'd solve my wife's problems, which is probably what we're not together. Not that. But you see, I would go home and I'd be like, you listen, you worked where you told that girl. Or like I had solutions for her, as opposed to just what she wanted was somebody to join her, somebody to be there with her, somebody to listen and feel like we're in this together.
Which would be that letting.
It would be the letting,
Yeah.
as opposed to like, listen, little lady, like, let me make you see the world the way I see it. So with our students or any of your relationships, check in before addressing, ask inviting questions like, what have you tried before? What's worked for you? What are you thinking about trying? Like, just put it back on them. Because even if I had great solutions to their predicament, one of two things happens. Either they follow it and now they're dependent on David for all their solutions, or they follow it and it doesn't work out. And that idiot doesn't know shit and they're never coming back to me. But if I let them find their own solutions, we let them find their own way. All right.
All right, so another great tool would be to open class with low risk opportunities to share. So again, when we cultivate that connection, that sharing is a key component to being able to cultivate it. And it builds that resiliency that lets us let go of some of that fear. And then we're able to get to know them better. They're able to engage in the material. Be a part of the sharing. So it's not just tell me everything, but again, relationships are two-sided. So being able to empathize with another person's perspective. I was there once too. I hated statistics. So if you told me 20 years ago that I was going to teach it, I would have laughed. And so when people come in, and I think I've only had 2 students that wanted to take the class, we can empathize, we can join, but you can be that, you can do that. And someday you too can teach statistics. And finally, and I think I got this the first semester I was here. Professor David Reiss created these beautiful name tags, and I can't tell you how powerful it's been as a relationship building tool in my class, not just with my students, like me with them, but them with each other. So being able to call someone by name, even if it's just noticing something, again, I've seen you, she knows me. And so
Yeah.
learning students' names goes a very long way.
Yvette, you spoke up moments ago about the boss when we were talking about different power and things like that. But just before you said anything, I could tell you were getting ready to say something. And sometimes when you're looking around the room, you can see the students who are like on the verge of saying they're like coaching themselves up or they're rehearsing or whatever's going on. But with the name tags, you can just be like, Denise, are you thinking about something right now? And Denise could be like, no. And I'd be like, hey,
Dang it,
cool.
you know my name, yeah.
Like sometimes they're like, man, not only is he attentive, but he knows me. And like they forget the name tags or theirs. And then I learn the names faster. Another way to connect with them is low stakes, because the stats thing, they're not going to believe anything we say about that. I have face recognition issues, so I have to find some other way to associate humans with their names. I asked them on the first day, like, what music do you like to listen to? Or sometimes I do movies or something like that. And then I see Denise and be like, Denise likes Taylor Swift. Just a guess, but I would know otherwise anyway. And then that gives me an opportunity to share what I like too. So it's just that's the very beginning.
So
You're
more
gonna ask me who my boss was.
We said this is safe space.
I gotta go.
Surprise event. They're here. You've had something to say to you.
So really, it's about being authentic and cultivating that authenticity. So be you, be empathetic.
And then real fast, it's all this is written down for you. You can't directly change other people. You can't make change. When you make changes, when you adjust how you're conducting yourself, and this is where relational intelligence comes in, knowing who you are at your core, in your space, being you, having your own approach, people are going to respond to that. And I found that if I stick with just being the goofy version of myself, it's not a goofy version, it's me. I'm a goofy guy who doesn't take himself too seriously. I take my job very seriously. I take student success very seriously. That shows up over the course of the semester, and I give the students the opportunity to see that's who I am. I can't convince them of that on the first day. I wouldn't even try to convince you of that right now in this moment. You have to let that unfold, and you can let them change or not change and be the change you want to see in yourself first and then others.
So thank you for taking this journey on relational intelligence with us. Ultimately, it's the quality of our lives that's directly to the quality of the relationships we have. And so focusing on building that self-awareness, that other awareness, and ultimately strong relationships, not just with students, but colleagues, family, community, makes for a better life. And that's why we're all here. You can stand and clap. Thank you. 2:15.
Well done.
To just comment on the, learn their names, I seen a video where it said, most individuals like their names, so.
Yes.
Say their name, you got my attention.
The great thing about these cards too is they can put whatever name they want on it. I don't care, as long as I have it on the roll sheet, as long as I know what name they want to go by. Even if you want to go by a completely different name, this isn't even about like gender identity issues or anything, or dead names. Sometimes it's just like, I kind of feel like an Ambrose now or something. Fine. Ambrose, that's cool.
I have a story about that. So, Andrea, my colleague here, that's my middle name. I don't go by that name. I go by my first name because I respond to Andrea, not Andrea, not Andrea. And in one of my communication classes in college, that professor was like, what do you want me to call you? And I specifically said, I want to be called Andrea. And then he didn't call me that. He called me Andrea. And I was like, what was the software? So pronunciation is very important.
It's anxiety.
Right. And that's why I don't go by Andrea in my professional life. It's almost an alter ego.
Yeah.
So if I introduce myself to someone in Spanish, I'm like, hola, soy Andrea. If it's in English, it's Christina, which is really weird for me because in my head, I'm Andrea. When I talk to myself, hey, Andrea, right? And most people do not know me.
Christine's like a character that you.
It's like my alter ego. It's like my English speaking
Work mode.
Yeah, exactly. Or just in English, right? Speaking life. in general. So
That's fun.
They can't roll their R's.
I know, I was
Because my father couldn't roll his R's, so he couldn't say Marisa. So he was never able to say it.
that's a really great point. It's the A, right? Andrea,
yeah.
Andrea, no,
An-
Andrea, and
I'm not him.
I'm like, I'm reliving it, but I'm also like a linguist at
He
heart.
doesn't even look like this.
He was German, so I was
Yep.
like, it's funny because they pronounce Andrea kind of similarly, except the R is a little different. Instead of a rolled, it's like a kind of Spanish J sound. Anywho, I just thought I'd share that because it matters the name, but it also the pronunciation.
Nothing in the beginning of the semester gives me more anxiety
Then
than looking over the roll sheet and then going on to like Google for name pronunciations.
Yeah, it is.
But because for me, like, I don't mind,
Mhm.
because I'm, English is my second language, so I know that most of the times I'm gonna mispronounce the names. So I don't mind people saying Andrea or Andrea, but when when I introduce myself, I say Andrea. So they're like, oh, do I say Andrea or Andrea? And I'm like, that's fine, like, I don't mind, but I'm introducing.
More on.
Andrea. In Spanish.
See, I noticed the difference.
I'm sorry if that's hurt.
It is.
An insecurity in you. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful rest of the week.
So I guess I'm the chair.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. You need a pen? No, I like to get these around and then when you use it, you're like, this is from that one guy.